I think most of you are probably somewhat familiar with this, but just in case you didn't know, 3MT is an international competition in pretty much every research university, and even some Tier 2 and Tier 3 universities compete. The next step is the regional, which if you take Texas, you go to Maryland and you draw a diagonal line, and then everything below that is the southern region in our organization, the Council of Graduate Schools. Those are all the universities that go to this regional competition. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of energy. The room has about 200 people in it when you're competing, so it's a lot of fun and a lot of people, okay? But I do want to talk about just a couple of things for you. We're sticklers for the rules, and we adopted these rules because this is what the international community uses, so we do not deviate, and we're pretty strict with this. So let's talk about it. I won't read these to you, but a couple of things you need to know so we're all on the same page. Time is paramount, so 3 minutes, not a second more. If you go over your 3 minutes, you're going to hear this. So when you hear that, you're disqualified. And we don't make exceptions for that, okay? If there's a technical problem with the clock. So for instance, when you get started, I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a slide with your name and your title on it. That's going to be up there for the judges to see, okay? While that slide is up, I'm going to be getting the microphone situated on you, and I will keep you right over here until it's time to go. Once the judges are ready for you, they will tell me. You don't pay attention to them. They'll tell me, and then I will give you the signal to start. When you come out to the stage, you can stand wherever you like. Holly, our timekeeper, will start the clock with your first movement or your first word, okay? And you'll see the clock back there. If there's a technical problem with the clock, for instance, if you've started and the clock's not going, you'll hear that. It's a bell, same bell. Anytime you hear the bell, stop talking. Okay, so because if there's a technical problem with the clock, you hear the bell, we're going to stop you, get it reset, and we're going to ask you to start again. I hope we don't have to do that. We didn't have to do that last time, except for maybe that one time we had a little thing, but it's not a big deal, but we want to get your time correct, okay? In the 3 minutes, so important. Looking at that clock, if you've got 1 second left and you've got a whole sentence to say, stop talking. Because I have had someone last year who did a fantastic presentation, and she heard the bell and she just said about 5 more words and she was disqualified. So please don't do that. Just stop talking, okay? Any questions about those rules? Nope, okay. The judging criteria, I think that hopefully you've had a chance to look at this. These guys over here, the judges, are the final decision makers today. They're going to decide who moves to the final round. Final round, there's a different set of judges. These guys all work for the university. All the judges for the final competition are outside of the university except for one, and he's the president, Finvest's communication director, okay? So I'll just leave those up there and let you look at them for a second, see if you have any questions. Most of your scripts are hopefully they're memorized, so a lot of this is talking about what's in your script, so hopefully you feel good about this after you read them. And then, of course, there is the engagement and communications piece, which is paramount. You can be absolutely brilliant, but if you can't communicate well, we may never know. So we want to make sure we understand what you're trying to do and get us excited about those next steps in your research. Okay. Okay, and there is money. $1,000 for the winner, $750 for the runner-up, and the People's Choice, $500. These prizes will be based on tomorrow's competition, and the judges will decide who gets what, except for the People's Choice, which is a vote of the audience. We're live streaming. They can vote by text. If they're here in person, they can vote by text. Your mom can vote. How many times can their mom vote, Danielle? As many times as she wants to in a 15-minute period. So we ask you to be ethical about that. But if your friends and family can't make it to the competition and you still want them to vote for you for the People's Choice, and I'm sure you will have earned it, then they can do that online, okay? So that's how that's chosen. Okay, and these are our judges, Chaz, Sherry, Tracy, and Marilyn. Thank you all again so much for being here. Yay. And I think that's it. So why don't we get going? Yeah, so if you'll just turn around.
Hello, hello. As my daughter grown older, her favorite YouTube content changed from Baby Shark to other children at play. The research on learning technologies focused on children as content consumers, but I started asking, what is the experience like of these little reality TV stars as content creators? Since I couldn't find any relevant case study on this, I decided to make my own study. I produced Look Mommy Look series with my daughter. It's unscripted recording of my 5 years old talking about cool things on her toys. Over 4 months, I observed her behavior, analyzed the video and her response to the viewer comments, and the findings were very interesting. First, performing on YouTube is like show and tell without stage fright. Her behavior changed the second the recording started. Her posture, manner, tone became more like an actress on stage, and it was clear that she was acutely aware of an audience. However, unlike her dance recital, she was relaxed. Second, even little stars of YouTube feel ownership and competition. It didn't take too long for her to ask every little details about the production. She wanted to keep improving her work for a variety of reasons. One, to control over her show. Two, to provide the best experience for her unseen audience. And three, to be on par with or better than other shows on YouTube. Third, this is what's so exciting about my research in learning technologies and childhood education, that such a format is fantastic for assessing children's development. The use of video in developmental study is well documented. However, online video is totally different because a kid is in the action in relation to unseen audience. The child tries to portray the best version of herself, more confident and professional. Emerging technology is going to be inevitably part of our children's lives. The danger of social media are being studied in depth, but further study is required to see the positive application of them. The sample size of this study, of course, limited, but it does help us begin to answer to a question like, what kind of strength can they build through this online video production? Stay tuned. I will get the full answers for you next time. Until then, like and subscribe. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
I'm not breaking any news if I tell you that we do not yet have a cure for cancer. What we do have, however, is relentless effort, advanced technologies, and still plenty of room for improvement in cancer therapy. As many people as the entire population of the state of Idaho are expected to find out they have cancer by the end of this year alone. And a third of that number will leave their loved ones behind in the same time period. For women, the most common type of cancer is breast cancer. 1 in 8 women will develop invasive breast cancer at some point in their lives. In my project, I studied the worst kind of breast cancer called triple negative. It disproportionately affects younger African American and Hispanic women, and to this day, we do not have an effective treatment for it. Our current therapies either do not work very well or lead to drug resistance, resulting in dramatically lower survival rates in triple negative patients. We have taken one of these chemo drugs that cause drug resistance, we'll call it drug A, and combined it with a second relevant drug, we'll call it drug B. That combination helps overcome resistance to drug A and is able to kill 11 out of 12 triple negative cell lines. There was one resistant cell line. Turns out this cell line didn't have the target of drug A to bind to. Therefore, we used a different drug in combination with drug B, and that worked as well. In the end, we were able to kill all 12 cell lines using a combination of drug B and another drug that was right for the tumor. Drug B blocks a protein called JNK, or junk. There are 3 junks, junk 1, 2, and 3. It's important to know which junk you're targeting because each one has a different function. We have shown that junk 1 is mainly responsible for the action of our drug. Understanding the mechanism whereby junk 1 mediates drug response will provide us with potential new targets for drug design. Cancer therapy can take different shapes and forms from immunotherapy to chemotherapy. We're all in search of a cure. Sometimes all it takes to treat the worst kind of cancer is making the right drug cocktail, finding the right target to block. Sometimes all it takes is finding the right junk. Thank you.
Do you remember the boil water notice last year? People in this city panicked and scrambled to get bottled water from grocery stores. Restaurants were unable to provide any food because they have no clean water to cook. This period reminds us that water shouldn't be taken for granted. It's a precious resource. My research is about improving the membrane filtration system in water treatment plants. A sketch of it is shown on the left. These membranes are similar to a coffee filter. When dirty water flows parallel to the surface of the membrane, clean water can flow through the membrane pore and impurities are blocked due to their size. Unfortunately, if the amount of impurities spike due to heavy rain like last year, these impurities may either clog the membrane pore as internal clogging or stack on the membrane surface as surface clogging. This clogging will hinder water from penetrating through the membrane and slows down the purification process. Based on our study, most impurities are hydrophobic or water-repelling in their nature. So the solution is to coat a hydrophilic material on the membrane surface. This hydrophilic material will attract a layer of water molecule and weaken the interactions between impurities and membrane surfaces. However, most hydrophilic materials are not robust or stable in water, which means they will deteriorate over time and cannot last for long. To fix this issue, we turn to Mother Nature. Mussel is a notorious creature for shipping industry because they can attach to almost any ship or fishery infrastructure and then make their surrounding substrate hydrophilic. These properties may be annoying for fishermen, but they are ideal for a membrane coating. We studied muscle and found a chemical called DOPA. This material is hydrophilic, robust in water, and most important, they can attach to almost anything, including our membranes. I'm developing new coating based on this chemical. If my research succeeds, we will never need to fight for bottled water in HEB again. In addition to that, this membrane can be made into small, cheap, and portable modules as shown in the pictures. These modules can help people in the developing countries to access water, even in the harshest circumstances. So in conclusion, my research can not only help people in Austin, but also help people around the world. Thank you.
Good job.
Every time that you stop at a gas station to fill up your tank, in Texas, you're paying about $5 in federal and state taxes. Every time you go to the DMV to take a picture for your driver's license, you're paying federal and state taxes. Every time you forget to change the settings on your phone to no toll, and your GPS routes you through a road with a toll that you have to pay that dreaded $0.5 toll, you're paying for infrastructure. You're paying for pavements, bridges, traffic lights, and road signs. In Texas alone, it is estimated that we are going to spend $70 billion over the next 10 years. I say that again, $70 billion. This means that highway agencies need to decide what project to do, when to do it, and where to do it. Should we fix I-35 or Mopac? Should we do it this year or next year? Should we go and take the entire road off, or should we do a patchwork? These are the type of complex decisions that agencies have to make. But as part of making this decision, they need to consider three goals of the sustainability framework: environmental, equity, and economics. My research develops mathematical optimization models for allocating resources, that's $70 billion, while accounting for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, being more equitable, and also being cost effective. Why is this a difficult question in the first place? Well, because these objectives have conflicting relationships. For example, if we fix the roads too frequently, there will be so many people in queues, spending fuel, increasing greenhouse gas emissions, and we have to use asphalt, aggregates, concrete. All of that increases our greenhouse gas emissions. In addition to that, there is a tendency to fix roads that are in higher income communities or higher commerce because they look better, sometimes at the expense of rural or low income communities. So you see, this is a multifaceted problem. What I found with my research is that if we are intentional about the process of accounting for these three goals, one, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by as much as 60 to 70%. Two, when we develop quantitative equity metrics, we can actually improve equity by as much as 25%. And three, we can also be cost effective as part of this decision-making process, so that the $5 you pay at the gas station is worth it. Thank you. Oops. It's gonna. Forgot who's gonna take it.
It has been nearly 100 years since we discovered the first true antibiotic, penicillin, which has been used to save over 200 million lives in its brief history. But unfortunately, as biology does, the bacteria have evolved to resist the antibiotics that we're using to fight against them. It is predicted that by 2050, 10 million deaths per year will be caused by antibiotic resistance, even outpacing cancer mortality rates. Even more, within the last year, the World Health Organization has reported, quote, a serious lack of new antibiotics under development to combat the growing threat of antibiotic resistance. So my personal journey to solve this problem was spurred on by the hospitalization of my grandma when I was in high school. She was being treated for liver failure and became infected with MRSA, a highly resistant strain of bacteria. The infection significantly weakened her immune system, and she passed away just a few weeks later. To tackle antibiotic resistance, I am engineering yeast to brew new, better antibiotics. But why are our antibiotics better? So in our lab, we've developed a few genetic tools that allow us to randomize the antibiotics that are being made within our yeast. So what this means is that sometimes we'll create a really awesome antibiotic, but on the other hand, most of the time we'll create antibiotics that don't work. So the real question is, how do we sort through these millions of antibiotics that we make? We do this by blowing bubbles. So if you can imagine yourself blowing a bubble, what happens is that air becomes trapped within the bubble, right? So we have a system in our lab where instead of air being trapped within the bubble, we can actually trap one yeast and one bacteria cell within our bubble. So if we zoom out on one of the bubbles, shown here, we can see we have our engineered yeast, the good guys, that are producing our new antibiotic, and then we have our bacteria, the bad guys, here within the cell. And so what can happen with, or the two outcomes that can happen is that the bacteria either die or survive, right? So what we've also engineered is that once the bubble senses that the bacteria has died, the bubble will actually glow, and then we are able to sort this bubble and discover which antibiotic that is. So we can sort through millions of bubbles using this technique, which is really impressive and incredible. And so, but the real beauty of this system actually comes from the fact that it's not just used for finding one antibiotic for one strain of bacteria, like the MRSA that weakened my grandma's immune system. We can actually find antibiotics that work on any bacteria because we can encapsulate any bacteria within this system. So using this bubble sorting technique and my newly empowered yeast, we can now fast track a solution to the global issue of antibiotic resistance. Thank you. Oops. Thanks.
As you may have heard, the Texas Department of Transportation estimates that they'll spend $70 billion, with a B, over the next 10 years on Texas roads. About 90% of those roads will be asphalt pavements, as you can see up there. Now, asphalt pavements are a complicated material to design and a complicated material to build. We all want to be driving on roads that look like that one. More often than not, if you live in Austin, Texas, you probably find yourself driving on roads that look like that one. Huge problem with that? Well, most of the time when that's happening, it's happening many years earlier than we predicted. Why? A lot of it's due to materials. Now, why is this a big problem? Well, first of all, as I mentioned, your tax dollars go towards repaving roads that look like that. Not only that, asphalt construction is one of the worst contributors to climate change and the destruction of the ozone layer. What can we do to stop this problem? What can we do to make sure that our pavements don't fail prematurely? Well, we can make sure we're using the right materials. Now, asphalt mixtures are made of two components. You've got aggregates, which is just a fancy name for rocks. You've got binder, which holds them together. You can think of it like a Rice Krispie treat. The aggregates are the Rice Krispies, and the binder is the delicious marshmallow holding it together. Now, you can test the full mixture, as seen up there, or, as we've learned, cracking generally happens through the binder. So the binder is the main cause of our cracking, so we want to test just that. My research focuses on developing a new method to test asphalt binders that's more efficient, easier to use, and tells us much more about the material before we ever put it down on the road to find out if it's going to fail. Over here we've got what we call a poker chip test. This is a test of a thin film of asphalt binder, and we just pull it apart. It's very simple. The reason for doing this, well, this is most similar to the way that asphalt binder actually experiences forces in the field. Now, what I wanted to do in my research is look a little bit deeper. I didn't want to just look at the test method. I wanted to actually look at what was happening in the parts we couldn't see. So I looked at the microstructure of the asphalt binder. This is what we've done using a microscopic technique that allows us to see fracture when it first begins at levels just 1/100th of a millimeter. As you can see, we start with the microstructure, and as we apply some force, we see those little cavities growing bigger and bigger. This gives us an insight into what's actually happening inside the material before it forms a giant crack in the middle of your road. With this understanding, we can better tell what kind of asphalt binders are best to use on the road. Thank you. Thanks.
The problem of localize a device is everywhere. When you are seated in a self-driving car, your car needs to know where you are in order to localize to drive safely. And the same thing holds true when you are having your pizza delivered by UAV or when you are playing a VR AR game. So in these cases, the GPS signal is unstable, and therefore, we propose to use the 5G communication signal instead of the GPS to localize your device. As can be seen in the picture, there is a 1-to-1 relation between the location of your device and the channel parameters such as the channel gain and the angle of arrival and transmission delay. Therefore, our problems is basically to estimate those channel parameters and channel parameters to so how can we evaluate whether our algorithm is effective or not? As can be seen in the picture, there is a 1-to-1 correspondence between the location of your device and those channel gains. The observed signal can be written as a multiplication of the received signal and the transmitted signal. And here we have R equals to A times X. Well, to observe the X here, it is identical that the X can be well, this is to minimize the problem we need to solve can be proved to be identical to the problem of maximizing probability, and that probability is proportional to a square root of the square of R minus A times X, and here it is essentially a problem in the field of machine learning and of the spotlight of our time. So we have come a long way in proving that the problem of localizing the device is actually a machine learning problem to minimize a function. After we have acquired the X, it is essential, after we have acquired the X, okay, sorry, thank you. I have to say that the slides is not the final slides I sent to you yesterday. I added some terms, sorry.
On September 3rd, 2016, our lovely couple, Johnny and Janice Bryan, were preparing to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary at their home. But then suddenly, an earthquake occurred in Pawnee, Oklahoma, and they lost their house. This is only one of the observed damages occurring in central United States since 2009. Most of these earthquakes in central United States are believed to be human-induced earthquakes associated with more intense natural gas production and petroleum activities. They mainly occur in areas that, historically speaking, have had negligible seismicity, and the infrastructure there were designed for little to no consideration of seismic demands. Therefore, such an increase may raise concern over the safety of infrastructure in that area. More worrying, over 7 million people live in areas subjected to induced seismic activities, but yet it's still unknown how large and potentially damaging these earthquakes could be in central United States. So in my dissertation focuses on estimating the potential disruptions of these induced earthquakes on people's life, considering their safety, money, and time. In particular, I investigated the impacts of these earthquakes on different types of residential buildings and transportation system. To do so, first, based on past observed earthquakes, I developed predictive models to estimate the level of shaking for future events. Then, according to the drawings of many residential buildings and highway bridges, I developed computer models to simulate their seismic behavior for future events to see how much damage these earthquakes could cause for our infrastructure in this area. The results showed that the damage of induced earthquakes could go over millions of dollars and can affect thousands of people's lives if we are not prepared for them. So I proposed some retrofit decision and post-earthquake inspection decision to mitigate the risk of these earthquakes in that area. I'm so excited to let you know that the results of my research were implemented in national seismic software so that the government agencies can use them to reduce the impacts of these earthquakes on people like Johnny and Janice Bryant living in that area. Thank you so much.
Daniel was a 29-year-old healthy young man. He went swimming in the pool with his girlfriend one beautiful afternoon. He dove into the pool, and in one tragic second, he hit the edge of the pool and shattered his spine. As a result of that incident, he injured his spinal cord. He lost his ability to walk and swim. He has to sit on a wheelchair. He can move his arms, but he's lost his hand function. Among everything that he's lost in that 1 second, which one do you think he misses the most? The ability to move his fingers by his own will. In fact, when surveyed, about 80% of tetraplegics, meaning people who have lost function in both arms and legs after spinal cord injury, rated hand function to be the #1 factor that would improve their quality of life. This ranking was comparable to voluntary bowel and bladder movement. Without hand function, the most basics of daily activities such as eating and showering are severely affected, let alone the fancier tasks like writing or shuffling cards. Throughout the years, assistive devices were developed to help these people regain partial independence. Earlier devices included reachers with only open and close functions. Later on, more complex devices were developed that could move different joints of the finger, like the one developed in my lab. However, pure advancements in mechanical design have not proven sufficient to even come close to the dexterity levels of humans. This is where my research comes in, to act as the brains for these fancy fingers. I have worked to develop accurate mathematical models of the interactions between the fingers, the assistive device, and the object of interaction. This means these models explain the mappings between the control commands, the finger movements, and the position and forces at the fingertips. This means I can send the right commands to the motors to locate the fingertips in desired positions in three-dimensional space and to provide the right forces at the fingertips to fulfill a task, whether it's grasping a hammer or holding a dandelion. With that, not only we can achieve simple grasps with only opening and closing of the fingers, but also we enable fine grasping and dexterous manipulation. Hopefully, this will help people with hand disabilities regain independence in grasping and manipulation tasks. Who knows, maybe one day, spinal cord injury will not keep Danielle from being the dealer in a poker game on a beautiful afternoon. Thank you.
Populism is, well, popular. Don't believe me? Ask Brazil. From Jair Bolsonaro's election to the Brexit vote, populism is clearly growing worldwide, and the evidence is mounting. When we look at the United States specifically, say Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders in 2016, they shone a spotlight on populism in our country. But despite geographic and ideological diversity, the way we think about populism in the US is simple. When I say populist, we all think Bernie bros and MAGA hats. You know, white guys. But what if there was more to it? Using data from a nationally representative survey, I created a model of populist voters in the United States. Populism in all its varieties has three key characteristics. First, it sees politics as a struggle between good and evil. We are good, and those other people are evil. Second, anti-elitism. Citizens are good, and the elites above us are the source of that evil. And third, it sees the population as unified and capable of ruling itself. When we look at who believes in these things in the United States, 6 variables are significant. The first is age. The more candles you put on the birthday cake, the more likely you are to believe in populism. The second is education. If you have an associate's degree or higher, you're less likely to buy in. Third is income. The more money you make, the less likely you are to be a populist. Probably because anti-elitism is about you. Then we have party affiliation. The more strongly you identify with the GOP, the more strongly you will likely identify with populist ideas. Then, political knowledge. If you can tell me who controls the House and the Senate, you're probably not a populist. And finally, those voters with access to the internet at home display fewer populist tendencies. Now, populists are everywhere, but they are different everywhere. It's important that we in the United States understand who our populists are if we want to vote for them, vote against them, or just understand these phenomenon. Whether you want to join populist movements or fight them, you first really need to know who they are.
Good afternoon. Please take a minute to picture a student with a learning disability with a reading Lexile score of 800, reads 50 words per minute, and has comprehension skills at 75% accuracy. Who did you picture? Did you see yourself? Did you see the kid that sat next to you in your 3rd grade class? Or the one that sat in the back of the high school world history class? Or did you visualize no one, and you're sitting there thinking, I just rattled off a bunch of words and numbers that made no sense at all? Well, all too often, English learners with learning disabilities are known, are described, are defined by these numbers and words that mean nothing. Even teachers have a hard time translating them into meaningful things in their classroom. It doesn't tell us anything about what does the student know? What can they do? Or how do I teach them? Now I know scientists and biologists and engineers love their numbers. But these numbers are only give a tiny snapshot of the student's ability. In my study, I encourage special education teachers to reshape their approach, to really embrace the cultural diversity that each and every single student brings to the classroom. And to do this, I ask the teachers to learn 3 things about their students. The first one, their English language skills. There's a common misconception that social language and academic language develop at the same rate, when in fact they don't. Social language only takes a year or 2, whereas academic language can take up to 7 to 10 years to develop. The second thing, cultural strengths. What experiences has this student gone through? How does it shape who they are? And also, what is their native language? How does that influence their everyday lives? The third thing, instructional conditions in which the student learns best. Do you have a student that really struggles with writing, that often shuts down and doesn't produce any work? But what if that student was given an alternative format to share their knowledge? What if they were able to speak or talk through their essay rather than writing it? And they could blow the teacher away with their knowledge. In the end, when teachers were asked to do this, they learned more about the student they could ask for. They were then able to collaborate with other teachers and share. We must dig deep into the students and learn about their culture and language. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Chang. My research area is about fighting. Okay. 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 Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Chang. My research area is about fighting bacteria. Many people would say fighting bacteria is easy. Just use antibiotics. Indeed, antibiotics is one of the most important advances in modern medicine, which has saved millions of lives in the last several decades. However, with repetitive use of antibiotics, we've seen a substantial increase in bacteria that have now gained resistance to these once life-saving antibiotics. Today, there are infections that have become almost impossible to treat effectively with our current arsenal. One of the biggest public health threats is a family of bacteria called CRE, stands for carbapenem-resistant Enterobacteriaceae. The CDC and the WHO have listed CRE as a top priority in which new antibiotics are urgently needed. CRE poses an incredible challenge to clinicians because they are resistant to almost all currently available antibiotics. Can you imagine that 50% of all people who get infected with CRE in their blood will die? Bacteria have learned to evolve to survive millions of years. Importantly, they've adapted to not only conquer antibiotics, but also defeat the human immune system, which is known as virulence. Together, both virulence and resistance are a perfect storm for breeding deadly bacteria. In fact, the evolutionary processes between virulence and resistance share two common characteristics. First, both of these processes make bacteria to overcome stressful conditions by mutating. Second, both virulence and resistance have bacteria to evolve quickly by sharing these mutations. Our research aims to decipher this genetic code of CRE. My hope is that one day I can tackle this bacteria evolutionary strategy to end this bacteria nightmare. Thank you.
I'd like to start off by asking you all a question. How many of you in the audience have ever experienced getting a burn while cooking on the stove? Raise your hand. Lots of us, right? It's really common and it stings quite painful. Now I want you to imagine that you're inside of your vehicle, but you're trapped. You're unable to move. It's quickly catching on fire and it's only a matter of seconds before your body is covered in blistering burns. Well, you might think, well, how often does this actually happen? It actually happens more than you think. Over 60% of all U.S. hospitalizations are burn-related. Unfortunately, when our body is compromised in such a way, it tries to defend itself by initiating a cytokine storm, which are small molecules within your body that activate an immune response. This is normally triggered by infection and causes tissue swelling, as you see here. It often leads to organ failure and ultimately sepsis. Now, sepsis is another slew of problems. I'll describe what that is here. Sepsis can be defined as a blood poisoning condition normally caused by bacterial, fungal, or viral pathogens. People who arrive at the hospital with these severe burns end up acquiring sepsis because they have lost their protective barrier, their skin, and their body is now undergoing an immune response. Unfortunately for these people, the mortality rate races from 40% to 60%. And if it's left untreated, it goes up by 7% for every hour left untreated. This means that if you were stuck in that vehicle, the chances of you surviving are slim. Now that I've described the problem, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we're doing to solve it. My research is dedicated to identifying genetic and protein biomarkers that are in the blood that are key indicators of onset sepsis. To better understand these markers, blood samples will be taken from patients upon the arrival to the hospital and every 6 hours thereafter until they have either acquired sepsis or recovered. Over time, we will generate a list of these biomarkers and compare their genetic expression levels to those people who did not get sepsis. As you can see here, the black bars represent the genetic expression levels of those people who acquired sepsis and are being compared to those who did not in the gray bars. By identifying a signature profile for these biomarkers, we will learn to early detect sepsis, giving physicians an opportunity to treat and prevent this deadly condition. Thank you.
Okay, did we miss anybody? I think everybody went. Okay, so we're going to take our judges away to the deliberation room, and I would give it 30, 40 minutes, and then when they're done, we'll come back here and we'll announce those of you who will be moving on to the finals tomorrow afternoon. Okay, thank you all. Take some deep breaths, go get some water. You did great. Thanks. Move forward to the finals. Danielle, what time tomorrow do they need to be in here? At 12:30, please. Okay, so these are in no particular order. These are actually in the order that you presented. The first person going through is JoJo, so congratulations. Kevin Reed. Yeah. Kevin's not here. Ramez going through. Paria, you congratulations, and Sandra. Sandra here? Nope. That's it. Congratulations to all of you who are going through, and thank you to everyone else who participated. I hope to see you again next year if you're not graduating. If you're graduating, good luck to you. If not, I'll see you again next year. Thank you all.